to the $100 MBA Show, and today's a Q&A Weekends episode where I answer your question right here on the show. If you have a question you want to ask, we would love to answer it. Just email us at contact@100mba.net, or you can send me a tweet on Twitter @BizRepublic is my handle, BIZ Republic. As always, I'm your host, your coach, your teacher, Omar Zenhom. I'm also the co-founder of the $100 MBA, a complete business training and community online. You can check out some of our freebies over at 100mba.net. And today's question comes from Autumn. And Autumn asks, are blogs a necessary requirement to go along with your podcast? This is a really good question because there is some confusion around this area. When you produce a podcast episode, do you create a blog post around it? This is what's called show notes. Is this a part of your blog along with the other articles? How do you separate the two? Do you separate the two? Do you need to have them? All valid questions and concerns that anybody could have if they're starting a podcast or doing a podcast. So I'm going to get into all the details. I'm going to share with you what we do, and I'll give you my overall advice when it comes to podcasting and should you create a blog post around each podcast episode. All those details. So let's get down to business. Today's episode of the $100 MBA Show is sponsored by Webinar Ninja Live, the first national webinar conference here in sunny San Diego, California on September 26th. Learn from the masters of webinars like New York Times bestseller Michael Port, John Lee Dumas, Kate Erickson, Jason Zook, Grant Baldwin, myself, Nicole, and a whole lot more. You'll be learning everything from marketing to selling on a webinar to the equipment you need to run one properly. And we're doing it in the beautiful MoPA Theater here in San Diego. Get your ticket now at webinarninja.co/live. That's webinarninja.co/live. So Autumn asks, are blogs a necessary requirement to go along with your podcast? And when Autumn says blogs, she's referring to blog posts. So let me clarify something here. So typically when you create a podcast episode, you have a show notes page that is referring to that episode. It's a way to kind of jot down all the important things of that podcast episode, links that you may have mentioned, and a place for people to actually listen to the episode if they're on a browser. Now, traditionally, this is not a blog post. A blog post is an article, something that's written out, maybe some images, things like that. This is what's called a show notes page, like I mentioned before. So now that's clear, do you need to have a show notes page for each podcast episode? So technically, you don't need to have a show notes page for each podcast episode. You can have a show page where you have one page on your website, and our show page is 100mba.net/show if you want to take a look at our show page as an example. And there you can have like a playlist of all your episodes where people can listen to your show on your website. It just means you don't have any notes for each episode. People are going to have to just listen and jot things down. You won't be able to refer to things or say, hey, I put a picture in my show notes today to refer to what I'm talking about today, or a link. Or if you want to find out more about your guest on your podcast, I put some information in the show notes. But technically, you can publish the podcast without that. All you need is a media file, and you can just submit that media file to your feed, and you're all set to go. Now, this is not a podcasting tutorial episode, but technically you can do it without show notes. And there are shows that do that do have no show notes, and they just have the podcast, and it's just an audio show, and they don't refer to show notes at all. But I don't recommend that. I actually highly recommend that you have show notes for each podcast episode. And I'll tell you why. One, obviously, because having that extra information, those references for your listeners, is great for your listeners. It's just serving your audience. It's fantastic. It also gives them a reason to check you out, a reason to go to your website and see what you're all about. They may check out the show notes, but then later on check out some of your products. Maybe check out your blog. Maybe check out, your about page and learn more about you. Or better yet, they might sign up for your newsletter and be part of your mailing list. And therefore, you've gotten a strong contact, a great lead. So show notes are great in that way. It also cuts out a lot of fluff from your show, a lot of unnecessary time in your podcast episode. What I mean by that is that imagine I had to read out every single link of every single book or reference I made on the show. It's kind of unnecessary. If I have show notes, I could just say, check out today's show notes. The link's right there. They can click the link right there and get sent to that page right away. They don't need to remember anything, and it's just so much easier. This is especially important if you have sponsors. When I do my sponsor read, mention the link to the sponsor. Now, you may remember the link, you may remember the coupon code, which is great, but if you don't, you can always refer to the show notes on the show page. So you're also serving your sponsors in that way. But one big reason why you should have show notes for each podcast episode is probably something you haven't heard of much, but it's so important and it's so powerful. And it has to do with your SEO, your search engine optimization. In other words, it's easier for people to find you on Google or search engines when you have something on your website in text that's describing what your podcast episode is all about. If you don't have a show notes page for each podcast episode, it's very hard for them to find that episode if they're just Googling those keywords. It may get picked up off the iTunes SEO or Stitcher's SEO, but it may not. You have a stronger chance when you have a text-rich podcast show notes page for each episode. It also adds content to your own website, which builds your body of work on your actual site. So people have a lot more to explore on your site and not just, blog posts. They also have podcast episodes. That means we have 358 episodes of our podcast. That means we have 358 show notes page, one for each episode. So we have a lot of data, a lot of information that can come up on the search engines when people are searching about how to improve their business, about all the different topics we talk about on the show, and just in general, a lot of great value for our audience. So you might be thinking, do I include my show notes in my blog? Is it part of my blog feed? Meaning if they go to my blog, do they see blog posts along with the show notes for each podcast episode? Or are they separated? And if so, how do you do that? But before I get into that, I got to give love to today's sponsor, Casper Mattresses. Obsessively engineered American-made mattresses at a shockingly fair price. And now you can get $50 towards any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/MBA and use code MBA. Listen, you spend about a third of your life sleeping. Let's make sure you're doing it on a good mattress, and we know how important a good night's sleep is for an entrepreneur. Casper brings together two comfy technologies for better nights and brighter days, latex foam and memory foam. So they've got just the right sink and just the right bounce no matter how you sleep. They even got a risk-free trial and a return policy. They deliver it straight to your door and you can try it for 100 days. And if you're not happy, they'll pick it back up. At the store, maybe you'll get a minute to try your mattress. With Casper, you'll actually get to sleep on it. It's $500 for a twin-size mattress and $950 for a king-size mattress. Comparing that to the industry averages, that's an outstanding price point. So get $50 towards any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/MBA. And remember, use code MBA. Terms and conditions apply. So do you separate the two? Do you separate your blog posts from your show notes? Now, if you're publishing a podcast episode once a week, then I think it's okay if you can just include them in your blog post stream. So if you go to your blog and you see article, you can have a podcast episode as well. That works just fine. But if you're publishing a podcast episode more than once a week, maybe twice, 3 times, or daily, then you're going to want to separate it because your blog feed is going to be filled with show notes. And people are not going to be able to kind of find your articles. So if you're on WordPress, you're going to want to separate these two by using categories. There's a plugin called List Category Posts, and this allows you to list only the categories you want. So you can go into your blog and remove the category that you set for your podcast. So make sure you create a category for your podcast show notes. And that way, in your blog, only your blog posts that are not the show notes will show up. So how do you make sure that your show notes actually show up? You can create a show page just like we did with the $100 MBA, 100mba.net/show, and go there and you'll see I've listed all the episodes, and these are just direct links to those posts. They won't show up in my blog, but I have a reference to them on my show page, and people can click to that link and go directly to that post easily without having to be part of my blog. If this sounds kind of confusing, don't worry about it because it is confusing. It's not easy to understand. It's quite all right. If you head on over to our site, you'll see a visual of what I'm talking about, and you'll see how we've separated our show notes from our blog, and you'll see how we did it. All right, Autumn, I hope that helps, and I hope that answers your question. I hope I've helped other people that are listening with that question, with that answer to that question. All right, guys, if you enjoyed today's episode, if you enjoyed any episode of the $100 MBA Show, we would love to hear from you with an iTunes rating and review. By leaving an iTunes rating and review, you help support the show and you help us get more exposure. It helps our rankings and allows us to reach other listeners. Here's a great review from Tara's Health Tips. Great format for quick tips that make a difference. 5 stars. A few episodes in, and I'm loving the podcast. It's long enough to provide good information and short enough that I can listen here and there when I have 10 minutes of free time. Also, I love the host. Great voice and personality. Thank you so much, Tara. That means so much to me. Thank you. And thank you all that have left iTunes rating and reviews. We really, really do appreciate it. And read every single one of those. All right, guys, I want to leave you with this. There are some technical aspects of running a podcast that are not clear-cut, and today's question shows that. But that's okay. You only need to set it up once, and then you're good to go. And if you ever create a second or third or fourth podcast, then you'll know your way around, because I know that firsthand. We created a podcast before, and then when we launched the $100 MBA Show, it was a lot easier because we had the experience of going through all the technical stuff. So don't get intimidated by that. You can find out, you can learn how to do it, you can ask questions just like Autumn did today, and you can get over the hump and get your podcast out there and do it the right way. All right, guys, I hope that helps, and I hope to see you in tomorrow's episode. I'll see you then. Take care.